I hope this new movie makes you puke. Well, at least that's what the director of Evil Dead Rise wanted audience to do when they saw this new movie. Evil Dead Rise is actually quite a fascinating film, considering that it was supposed to go straight to streaming on HBO, but when it got such a positive result in the testing phase, they decided to send it to theaters. For being the 5th installment of the Evil Dead film series, it was actually quite good, getting back to the good old practical filmmaking that has always been a staple of solid horror movies, which of course has been the staple that director Sam Raimi has brought to the previous 4 films. This time, he passed the baton on to Lee Cronin, who directed and wrote the script for Evil Dead Rise. So with the unexpected success of this movie, let's take a look at the DIY and practical mentality that makes this film so interesting, from the 1,700 gallons of movie blood that cost $231,000, to building the sound effects of evil, to fascinating lens choices, and creepy golden contact lenses. Yeah, let's get into this. As always, let's get a quick sense of the camera and lenses used in this film. This film uses the Arri Alexa Mini LF, the smaller version of the Alexa LF we talked about in the John Wick video a few weeks ago. It is, of course, our intention to dive a bit deeper into large format cameras versus Super 35 cameras here soon. However, the Alexa LF Mini version makes sense for this film in particular, since it takes place in a tightly controlled space in one condo in a skyscraper. With its body weight of 5.7 pounds, this allows cinematographers to fit into tight spaces, use more handheld filmmaking techniques, and have a bit more room for creativity that the 17-pound Alexa LF makes a bit more complicated. This camera was used for Stranger Things and The Batman, so it's no slouch of a camera, and it's a very logical choice for this film.
Nothing a big ol' hug and kiss from you won't fix.
Now, the lens section is where things get really interesting. They use the Panavision Ultra Panatar lenses, the T-Series lenses, and the Panavision G-Series anamorphic lenses. This is notable because of the larger format sensor. The Panavision G-Series lenses were built for Super 35 cameras, so how and why were they used to film this movie on a large format sensor? Well, the funny thing is with the term large format, is that really nowadays just means anything above a Super 35 sensor, and has a wide range of sizes. Some massive, like the Alexa 65, and some a lot smaller, like the Arri Mini LF, which you can see by this chart, it's not really that much larger than the Alexa Mini. So in theory, you can use the Super 35mm lens on the Mini LF. And Fury Motion Picture Company has a great video on this we've linked below if you'd like to learn more about it.
Now, I've actually talked to a surprising number of people who think that their Super 35 lenses are useless on a full-frame camera, but honestly, there's a few options. Now, obviously, if you're going to put Super 35 lenses on a large format camera, there's going to be some limitations and some compromises. The question then is, are those compromises and limitations acceptable for your particular project?
And from this video, I've kind of gleaned a little bit of information about why I think they were used for this movie. Some anamorphics cover a larger area than necessary for Super 35, because as my good friend from France, JC, pointed out, this allows you to use more of the center of the glass, which gives out less distortion. But using it on an LF sensor, you start to hit the edges and the fringes of the lens itself, adding distortions back in and adding a bit of a character to the final image. You can see this in some of the scenes in the movie, with exaggerated curvature on the edges of the shot and also slight vignetting at times in the corners of the footage. This actually plays very well for a horror movie, giving it some weird, unnatural looking shots that help you feel even more uneasy, and I think that's used to great effect throughout this movie. All of this to say, understanding gear and lenses can help to achieve a desired look by breaking the rules, in a sense. Putting all of this together in the camera is cinematographer Dave Garbett, who also worked on Ash vs. Evil Dead, the TV show version of this series, as well as Sweet Tooth. And wouldn't you know it, Panavision G-Series lenses were also used on Sweet Tooth.
Do it for Mom and Dad.
No self-respecting horror movie is ever complete without really digging into the sound effects and sound design, as it really is the beating heart of all horror movies. In fact, many times in horror movies, they use a secret weapon that you can't even hear at times called infrasound. Humans can feel the sound at a frequency of 19 Hz, and it's just below the threshold at which humans can actually hear at 20 Hz. And this is where it gets interesting. In nature, this frequency or sound exists and can make us feel incredibly unsettled. Infrasounds can be found in avalanches, earthquakes, and wind, and many other natural events. The movie Paranormal Activity is even rumored to have used infrasounds in their movie in 2002. The point is, there are sounds in nature, even beyond these, that invoke an instinctual feeling of fear in most humans, and Hollywood knows this. Director Cronin said this about creating the soundscape for the movie. I take sound extremely seriously, and I'm glad that the people are connecting with the soundtrack, the soundscape of the movie, from the music to the sound design. It's a full noise film. This movie does a great job of heightening the sound of literally everything that makes sound in the movie, from fingernails on a bathtub to the fire of a gas stove, which plays with the heightened nature that is typical in the human physiological response to danger. When our fight or flight response is triggered, our senses are heightened. And when watching horror movies, our fight or flight response can be set off by what is happening on the screen. So what better way to design a soundscape and sound effects than to design it around human physiological response to a situation like this? And this movie's sound effects do just that. Now, moving on to the practical effects in this movie, Alyssa Sutherland, who plays the mother who gets possessed in the movie, was quoted saying that there were no digital effects used in this movie. In this film, as the character that is possessed slowly turned from human-like to something less so, Cronin uses stunt doubles, specifically in some of the crazy, unnatural wall-climbing scenes. In the past, Raimi had used stop motion to get that unnatural human movement down as well. So a lot of interesting techniques used throughout this series. There's also tons of makeup to help sell the realistic aspects of this movie, and of course golden contacts to make the possessed character's eyes seem unnatural, which is actually a step above what Raimi had used in the past, which actually blinded actors while they wore them.
I was the contact lens technician on set. They would have to rehearse all the scenes without their lenses in so they could see where they had to go. Then they would go, okay, we're ready to shoot, and I would run in, put all their contacts in, and then they would do the scenes. But what people don't realize is their contact lenses were completely white. There was no hole for the pupil for them to see.
When Cronin was asked about using digital effects to help with some of the imperfections, he said, "When it comes to digital effects, how I always operate is that I use them to enhance, but not to define. I more use digital effects to knit little things together, to extend things slightly, to add a little bit, and to polish. But the spirit of every single effect done to the moment in this film was practical." In this movie, one of the biggest practical effects was the use of fake blood, which led to the movie actually getting banned in Germany because of the graphic content.
Everybody here dies by dawn, Dad.
In order to make the blood a bit more visceral in the movie, they used a very thick, soupy mixture of blood.
There was a lot of blood, yeah, so we did have to, the volume we had to create required this kind of like a cookhouse. It was like a blood meth lab. It was 6,500 liters of blood that we used. It's always a tricky one to handle because it's so messy and it's so hard to kind of clean up, but we kind of really went for it, and it was important in a movie like this.
And they used it everywhere, from scenes reminiscent of a Billie Eilish music video to literally filling an entire elevator with fake blood. Throughout this movie, the commitment to using practical elements like fake blood constantly grounded the movie and made it feel more visceral and more immersive. You never saw a shot that pulled you out of this movie. And another movie that actually achieved this immersion through composition was Knock at the Cabin. And while it was, you could say, a mediocre story, the cinematography of it stole the show and kept it from being an absolute failure. So check out how cinematography saved this movie here.